Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we get into the latest around the big league club, including Brett Baty being sent down and Mark Vientos getting to play more consistently. Of course, we spend a lot of time down on the farm reviewing the start the new prospects for the Mets have gotten off to, while keeping an eye on a familiar name as well. We close out with new scoreboard predictions and, of course, answer your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to our show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Of course, if you want to see our faces, you can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. Listen, while the Mets season unfortunately feels to be sinking, especially after the trade deadline, we do not slow down here. We have our eyes on the minor league system. Of course, we have our eyes on the young players with the big league club. So with that, Joe, I feel like you got busier since the trade deadline ended. I've seen prospect updated rankings. I've seen minor league clips tweeted out every single night. Call me crazy, but are you enjoying this month maybe as much as possible that a Mets fan can?
I'm actually loving it, to be honest. The Mets I put the Mets on to the point of just they're on, but I don't need to worry about wins and losses as much as maybe I would have a month ago. And I love having MILB.TV and got all the clips of, like, I'm putting on the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, and Luisangel, Acuna, and Drew Gilbert are batting 1-2 in the lineup, and they have all the pitchers there. So this is fun. And like you said, if you haven't seen it, go to SNY.TV, and it's also pinned on my Twitter profile. Check out my updated top 20 prospect list. I put out 2,500, 2,700 words, whatever it is, on the top 20 guys to me in the Mets system, and that includes the guys that were traded for at the deadline. That includes the draft picks that a lot of people seemingly have forgotten about because of the trade deadline. And then obviously everyone else that was already in the system.
I know I was hounding you over text about the guys that didn't make the cut, notable names that didn't make the cut. It's amazing state of the farm system where there are guys that we know, we cover, and couldn't fit into the top 20. So we'll get into all of that in just a little bit. A quick housekeeping note. Thanks to all of you, and there was many I watched, who entered the giveaway for the Mets Pod Shea Stadium neon t-shirt, our collab with Athlete Logos, who did just an absolutely incredible job on the design. The winners are being chosen, and we'll hear from us soon, and we will definitely look to another giveaway soon. So keep listening to the show, and keep your eye on SNY's social media for more. All right, Joe, let's get into the big league club first before we go down into the farm system in depth. I think the big story this week for the Mets is Brett Baty being sent down. A lot of detail going around of just the need for maybe not even just a physical reset, but also a mental reset for Baty. It feels like when he came up, there was just more life to his game, a little bit more comfort. And then as things wore on, one mistake kind of compounded to another, notably in the field, but Baty not hitting for a lot of power, not hitting for great average. And I think as advertised, he was a guy that was supposed to be able to drive the ball into the gaps, drive the ball into the opposite field. And we thought he'd be capable at third base. And it feels like the struggles once again just kind of compounded. So disappointing for Baty. No one's giving up on Brett Baty. Did you agree with this move? Is this a situation where the Mets, let's be honest, aren't playing for much right now? You'd like to see him try to tread water or swim above it at the big league club? Or do you think this is a situation with a young player that you got to get him down to Syracuse where he's been more comfortable for a full reset, maybe get right and come back in September? If not, come with a new fresh mindset next spring?
Major League Baseball is very hard. And I think we take that for granted that these young kids come up and they're not robots they're not AI that are predetermined how good they're going to be based on where they're ranked or anything. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. I think this was the right move. Obviously, Brett Baty's been in his own head. That article, I believe, from Mike Puma at the Post, this is a guy that's just like, yeah, I'm making my decision while the pitcher's winding up. And just all the things that are compounding mentally, physically, obviously, it's been a problem dating back to July 8th. he has a 451 OPS, and that's obviously not big league capable. To your point, I don't think anyone's giving up on Brett Baty. This isn't the first or last time we will see a highly touted young player come up to the major leagues, struggle, have to go back, get a mental reset, and hopefully in Baty's case, they'll be like many others where they come back better and the way they were. I truly wonder, I know the dates necessarily don't line up, but I wonder if that drop pop fly that had the crazy angle like a slice of a driver off the tee, and he misplayed that one. I wonder if he took that to the plate as well, and his other fielding struggles as well. We talk often about when Francisco Lindor was going through his struggles earlier this season offensively. We were like, it's a credit to him that he doesn't take his offensive struggles into the field. It feels like Baty has taken probably his defensive struggles to the plate. So hopefully it's just a mental reset, and we could see him back here in the next couple weeks. If he goes and does what he has to, he could come back and get another opportunity. Because the reality is the Mets organizationally are planning as if Brett Baty is going to be the opening day third baseman in 2024. And you kind of have a really weird dichotomy here of what would have to happen for you to deviate from that plan, and what is the plan that you deviate to.
That's the big thing, right? There's two sides to this. One, he's a young player, and I think you and I are high enough on Baty as a hitter that he will figure this out and things will be okay. And I think there is the other reality, as this is baseball, this is honestly sports. I cover the NFL draft, as many of you know, and I tell people every year we get so excited over 8 million different players, and a handful of them, right, have long successful careers. Baseball's not overly that different. Yes, he was a first round pick. The hit rate obviously is going to be higher on first round picks. I think that he has a higher floor at the plate. This is just a clear, huge slump and struggle and adjustment. But I think on the flip side, Joe, now for the Mets, I'll throw this one to put a little bow on the Baty conversation today. Do you go into the fall and winter with an idea that maybe Ronnie Mauricio takes some reps at third base? Maybe this one's probably a smidge early, but I think a lot of smart evaluators have leaned this way. Maybe Colin Houck is a guy that plays at a corner, quite quicker than we expected. He moves over from shortstop. He's a big kid. I saw the pictures of him in his Mets debut uniform, and I said to you, that is a big human considering how young he is. It looks like he will be a corner, especially with the plus arm. Do smart organizations, Joe, not push Baty out, right? You're not doing that. He's still too young, too much of a small sample size, but maybe make some backup plans when you have this much depth in the infield of your farm system?
I think it would be a good idea to start prepping what your backup options are in case this carries over. Because I do believe when we get to opening day 2024 and whoever the manager is puts out the lineup, Brett Baty is going to be at third base. Like, I firmly believe that's going to be the case on opening day of 2024. But if this is something that he doesn't figure it out, you need to be prepared. I think Ronnie Mauricio, they've gotten more and more comfortable with him as an outfielder. So I'm not sure if there's plans for third base, though. Back before Ronnie even started playing left field and second base, he had said publicly that if he were to play a position other than short, he thinks he'd be most comfortable at third base. So perhaps that's something they could consider. And then when you think about Colin Houck, I mean, I think the ETA I put on him is 2027. So he's not someone that you're looking at anytime soon. But long term, I agree with your overall premise. And most scouts and evaluators I talk to also agree that Houck long term is going to be a third baseman. But yeah, this Baty conversation is going to be something that we're going to be talking about for months on end, because maybe he comes back September 1st and hits 345 in September, and we feel a lot better heading into the offseason. So it's going to be really interesting to follow, which now I'm all over the minor league games. I'll be watching every single Brett Baty at bat in AAA Syracuse.
Another prospect that is now getting to play more consistently, but has just not gotten going, would be Mark Vientos. And I think you look at the Mets season, it's fascinating. They've had these, I think coming into the year, we looked at it, I wouldn't say big three. I don't think Vientos was looked at on the same platform Baty and Alvarez were. Alvarez has been everything and more you could have expected for a 21-year-old. Baty has obviously gone the other way. And then Vientos, who you were hoping can maybe become a viable right-handed DH, is just not put it together at the plate, Joe. And now he's getting to play every day. We'll see if he can get hot to end the season. But the reality is the last 3 games, as we sit here and record, they obviously had the throttling of the Cubs, where the Mets won 11-2, coming off the sweep of the Orioles. But the 2 games he played in the Baltimore series, I mean, he's had 12 at bats in that time, and he struck out in 6 of them, Joe. And he only has 1 hit in that stretch. So I know, yes, it's 3 games, but that small sample size to me is kind of the Mark Vientos story right now. A guy that is batting 202. He has an OPS of 554. He's only hit 2 home runs in 96 plate appearances. He's going to play every day, and now's the time to find out, because I know Luke Voit was just killing it for Syracuse Mets. The New York Mets, the big league club, could have brought up Voit, sent Vientos back down if they felt like they were going to try to make a push for this wild card. They don't feel like they are after all the trades. They're now letting the young players play, notably Vientos, who wasn't playing consistently. Joe, I'll leave it like this, not to be too pessimistic, but if Vientos doesn't really turn it on at the plate, because he's just not a guy that's going to give you much defensively, what is the outline for him going into the next spring during the offseason? Because the Mets have, once again, a lot of promising guys in AA, a very promising player in AAA in Mauricio that is going to be with the big league club next year. And he's also a man without a position as it stands right now. We think he's going to be able to stand somewhere, but once again, a man without trying to figure out where he's going to play. I never want to look at a 23-year-old player who has, not even 100 plate appearances in the big leagues this year and say the hourglass is emptying out. But it just feels like with Vientos, it isn't working. The Mets haven't been overly excited at the idea of playing him until they had no one else left. And I'm just finding it hard to be optimistic, as much as that really stinks, because I would love to see his power play at the next level.
Playing almost every day is just a part of his evaluation for 2024. Like you said, you cited very small sample size, and obviously he hasn't had a ton of at-bats or plate appearances, and the numbers still don't stick out. But here and there, even some of his outs are hard hit. And I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes when they see that. Like every couple games, maybe every game, I don't know. But SNY will show on the bottom, like, hardest hits balls of the game. And I feel like you fairly often see Mark Vientos on that list. And one of them was like 106 mile an hour ground out, which he was out, so it doesn't matter. But he is hitting the ball hard when he does hit it. He's not hitting it enough. He had that screaming double against Felix Bautista, who's been Edwin Diaz this year.
That was impressive.
In Baltimore. So I think the more opportunity he gets, I think the more comfortable he could potentially get, because you need him to hit. Because like you said, Connor, defense is not really a big part of his game. We've seen his struggles when they put him at third base. He could play first base a little bit, but we've seen some struggles there as well. He just needs to hit. And if he doesn't hit, over the next month and a half, 2 months before the season ends, then he's going to be a guy this offseason that you can't plan to have him have a role with the big league team on opening day 2024. Certainly he has minor league options left, so he could be depth in AAA. He could be a trade candidate if you want to in the offseason, depending what kind of approach the Mets want to take. But I think there's enough flashes with Vientos offensively where the hard hit rate is there, that there is the potential over this span to show a little something and kind of, maybe get a little confidence in him. But I certainly understand why you and a lot of fans right now think Mark Vientos is not a part of this team in 2024.
All right, let's get into, it's wild to say, maybe some more exciting stuff, and that is down on the farm system. This is the most in a long time that I am paying attention as much to the minor league plate appearances and all the great clips that you tweet. SNY Mets often tweets as well, of what's going on throughout all levels of the system, because these guys are just fun to watch play, and they're exciting. And not all of them are going to be major leaguers, but there is a realistic chance that a handful of them are impactful Mets for the future. And a lot of them got to make their debut with the system, starting with Luisangel Acuna. the biggest, maybe the most notable or name-worthy acquisition from the deadline. He was the lone prospect in return of the Max Scherzer deal. He was a top 3 prospect in the Texas Rangers system, and now he is with the Double-A Mets up in Binghamton, Joe. So Acuna has gotten to play a handful of games with the Binghamton Rumble Ponies. I think he's had a hit in 5 of the 6 games, so he's been pretty consistent. He's walked a couple of times as well. Joe, what have you seen in a very, very early sample size of Luisangel Acuna?
You can see the explosive athlete that he is. That's what's really standing out. Like offensively, he's not hitting 370 in his first week or whatever, but you can see the explosive athlete he is, going first to third and almost having to be like grabbed by Reed Bridniak, the manager he's the third base coach, to not keep going home. But explosive athlete. He's looked smooth in the field. You've seen him be able to work some counts. So even though he's, flying out or grounding out, there's been quite a few at bats that I've seen where he's working a 7-pitch at bat. He's working an 8-pitch at bat, and then he flies out the center. So that's one of the things when you're looking at minor league players. A lot of people aren't watching minor league games, and I sure as heck don't blame you for not watching minor league baseball. But scout the stat line, right? And you're like, he's
Spark notes,
okay.
Joe. Spark notes.
From a process standpoint, I think it's been a good sign, the kind of athlete that he's showing that he is, and the ability to work counts. He's not chasing pitches in a significant way in the early going for Double-A. So all in all, I think Acuna's looked fine, and I have no regrets putting him at the top of my prospect list.
That's awesome. He's the guy that's going to have the most eyes on him, I would say. It's not just the name, it's the fact of where he sat in the rankings nationwide when the Mets acquired him. The fact that something you and I have talked about, this is an organization that it feels like they need an injection of athleticism in the system. You see these guys coming up, Vientos, big power guy, doesn't have a position. Baty trying to figure it out at third, but another bigger guy that is not going to be a plus glove out there. Alvarez, his athleticism behind the plate blows my mind. He's exceeded expectations beyond any other, anything that we ever thought this year. But with Acuna, obviously, he's somebody that can actually stay in the middle infield, can give you plus on the bases with IQ, not just speed. And I think it's going to be fun to watch. And I think another guy that fits the mold of being a pretty good athlete, and you could speak better to this, Joe, but a true center fielder, in Drew Gilbert, one of the big returns from the Justin Verlander trade. He was the Astros' top prospect at the time. We've already seen him make some diving catches in the Mets minor league system. We've seen him have some good at-bats. And there's a world where if Gilbert continues to stack, good seasons, I would say, he still is going to finish this year in Double-A. I don't think he's going to be on the big league club next year. Maybe he surprises us. But we know the Mets at some point, Nimmo will be playing a corner at some point in his future, or just will need a couple days off here and there. The guy needs rest at times. It would be amazing if Drew Gilbert can be a true center fielder of the future for this team.
So a lot of people told me when the Mets traded for him, and obviously I remember it dating back to the draft, and it's plays with his hair on fire, like that kind of classic quote. Holy heck, does he play with his hair on fire? I mean, this is gap to gap. That play, when he made the diving catch, a couple innings before, he chased the ball all the way right near to the wall in the left center field gap and made a well-extended catch there. And he's going and going. Billy Epler told the Binghamton radio he was up there watching Luisangel Acuna and Drew Gilbert. And so he did a few minutes there. And he talked about how he's already been there for a few days, but he's already positioning his right and left fielder. Like he has that leadership quality that you need in a center fielder. And then at the plate, he tests outfielders. If he puts a ball into the gap, he's going to be going for second. If you are lackadaisical getting to the ball, he's going to keep going. He got thrown out trying it in one of the games, but I appreciate the effort. He obviously had the triple that drove in Luisangel Acuna, which was just a fun thing to happen on his second day, I believe, or second game with the organization. And then even some of the smaller heady things, there was he hit a single into right, and I like to believe he purposely got himself caught in a rundown between first and second so the second runner could score. So got cut off by the first baseman, and he grabbed his attention, got off base. He got tagged out, so obviously you don't necessarily want to do that, but it's the headiness that he has to allow that second run to score. And he is the type of player that he can play right field. He has enough arm for it. He can play left field. He can play center. He can play all three outfield spots. So that's an advantage for him. I imagine he'll spend the rest of the year with Binghamton. Reasonable chance to start next year in AAA or get to AAA before long. So he's getting closer and closer to that knock on the big league door. And he's the type of player that if he hits like he's capable of, everything else that comes along with his game, he's going to be the kind of player that, you know, people's sons want and daughters want Drew Gilbert jerseys, and people are going to want to, he's going to be a guy that people are really going to want to root for because he is 100% on everything he does.
Gilbert, 3 games already with the Binghamton Mets, the Rumble Ponies, of course. He is 4 for 11 with a triple, 2 walks already. So, you know, if he can not necessarily maintain that, but if he's a guy that hits over 300 at the AA level, where he obviously spent a lot of time for Houston this year, I'm with you, Joe, that we could see him start at the AAA level next year, where he will be 23 years old, and we'll see what he can do from there. In the same trade, it was so funny when the Verlander trade went down. You and I are texting. Everybody's, you know, kind of walking on eggshells. Are they going to be able to pry Gilbert from the Astros for Verlander? A lot of people were like that. Well, I was like to you, I was like, they better. I mean, he's the top guy in a system that doesn't have a lot of high end talent. And Gilbert was always a lock to be in the deal, it turns out. Then there was a throw in. Everybody was like, it's going to be another minor league player. Nobody really thought it would be a big deal. And it was Ryan Clifford, one of the biggest ascending bats in the Houston system, a guy that, you know, maybe was categorized the wrong way because, and you do a really good job always explaining this, Joe, he was an 11th round pick, but it doesn't really matter where you're picked in the MLB draft. It matters what your bonus was. And he was given near second round bonus money, telling you how he was actually viewed by the Houston Astros organization. Clifford now with the Mets. I'm still a little surprised the Mets were able to pry Clifford from the Astros with the kind of power he has. He's somebody that I think, once again, we're trying to figure out his long-term home. It could even be first base, which is really interesting. He's playing in Brooklyn, not in AA, as he just turned 20 years old. So this is a much younger player, already 6'3", 200 pounds. And we saw him hit an absolute missile for Brooklyn very early on, Joe.
First at bat. So I had MLB TV up, and I was just like, all right, let's see what Clifford.
It was
and he
loud.
Worked the count. Yeah, and I think it was a full count. So I think he worked a full count and then crushed an upstairs pitch out of the park. So the power's there. It's true plus raw power. Like if you're going on the 20/80 scale that scouts do, like it's raw like a 65, which is potential for 25 plus home runs at the next level. What stood out to me, it's a very simple approach at the plate. We've talked about guys like Kevin Parada, how they have interesting setups, and guys that have these swings with these big leg kicks or different like timing mechanisms. Ryan Clifford just has a smooth, simple left-handed swing. He's obviously going to have to do work against left-handed pitching. That's something that most lefties have to adjust to. From an athletic standpoint, he's probably like a 35 or 40 runner, which is well below average. So I think the most likely defensive home long-term is first base, but he has plenty of bat for the position. He shows a knowledge of the strike zone, which is something the Mets were seeking basically in almost every prospect they got. That's just something that the Mets value. It's a power over contact approach. I know his average has been pretty good this year, but I don't think as he gets to the upper minors and, you know, hopefully eventually the major leagues one day, I don't think he's a 300 type hitter, but I think the power is going to be there. And it's been a pretty exciting start to see him. And like you said, Connor, obviously a very highly regarded prospect. I put him number 7 in the Mets system. He's close to being 6. I went kind of back and forth on him and Colin Houck, but Ryan Clifford getting him as the secondary piece for Justin Verlander it's something the Mets are very excited that they were able to pull off.
Our last down on the farm name, a notable name, a familiar name, right? The other 3 have recently made their debuts in the Mets organization. This player was drafted by the Mets with the top 15 pick very recently. He was the on-base machine down in St. Lucie, now promoted to high A ball in Brooklyn, and that is Jett Williams, a longtime favorite of Joe's. And man, Joe, Jett gets the promo to Brooklyn in 6 games. He is getting on base at a 539 clip. He kind of laughed at his 422 OBP down in St. Lucie, is taking it to another level where he's got on base more than half the time already. He's also hitting 294 already, but he's drawn 8 walks in 26 plate appearances. He's also stolen 3 bases. Jett Williams, we talk about athleticism in this system. This dude can fly. He is an on-base machine at this point, and it's really fun to see him in Brooklyn right now and his play style that we saw down in St. Lucie translating right away.
What has really stood out with Jett this year is the plate discipline, obviously, that you mentioned. Because going back to last year's draft, I thought he was one of the best bat the ball skills of the entire draft class. I mean, like, he had better swing and miss rates than like Drew Jones and guys like that. Not quite Termarr Johnson, who's the top dog, but Jett might have been second in pure bat the ball skills. And the batting average early on in the season wasn't really there. It's obviously picked up in a big way over the last month and a half, 2 months. I didn't realize how advanced he was on plate discipline. And when you watch, it's not just the pitchers missing the plate by a foot, so it's so easy to take the pitches. Like, he's working counts. He'll take strikes in 2-2 counts. He's taking, fastballs up, which is like a prime thing that hitters will swing through and miss. So Jett has stood out in a massive way with that. And he got the up in my prospect list. He's number 2, right behind Luisangel Acuna for me. I have been probably the high person on Jett Williams dating back to the draft, and I see no reason why that shouldn't change. And you are now seeing those bat the ball skills come through. In the last game he played on Sunday with Brooklyn, he had a walk, naturally. He had 2 hits, 2 singles, 106 miles an hour off the bat and 108 miles an hour off the bat. So despite his small frame, he can pack a little bit of a punch and hit the ball hard. Even if it's not going to be big home run power, he's going to hit hard line drives, hard ground balls, and the speed is fantastic. I think I saw something the other day that he had said he set a goal this year for 70 stolen bases, and he's probably not going to reach 70, but he's going to be a 40-plus guy in his first year in pro ball. So the stock is heading up for Jett Williams. I think maybe some other publications will have him behind some other guys, but I am very in on Jett Williams.
35 steals already in the minors for Jett this year. I agree with you, Joe. He will get to 40. If you want to see Jett and the other Cyclones in action, Brooklyn hosts the Aberdeen Ironbirds this week in Coney Island. On Thursday, there's a Francisco Alvarez El Troll bobblehead giveaway for the first 1,500 fans. Friday's got post-game fireworks and a $20 ticket special that includes 2 24-ounce beers or seltzers. Saturday is Star Wars night featuring an out-of-this-world jersey giveaway for the first 1,500 fans. I've been to Star Wars night at the Cyclones game. It is awesome. Plus post-game fireworks, and on Sunday there's a Brooklyn Script t-shirt giveaway for the first 1,000 fans, a pregame catch in the field, and of course post-game kids run the bases. For tickets and full details, visit brooklyncyclones.com. And this is your reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right. The what and why to watch question right here, Joe. This is kind of what I think a lot of Mets fans, especially if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're facing this dilemma. We know we're looking at tough times in the very short term for the big league club. But we want to give ourselves a reason to watch a little back and forth here. Joe, I want you to start. And the sweep by the Orioles, you just see all the problems with what's left of this roster. And then once again, the big win over the Cubs, you see what Pete Alonso and Lindor's had a really, really good post-All-Star break here. The stars of this team offensively, what they could do when they need to carry the club at times. We know the Mets are not making the postseason. We know the Mets are playing a lot of guys right now that are essentially AAA players at best, and not the AAA players that we want to see what they could do as young bats, but guys that have been around a little bit. What are maybe 2 things for you that will have you turn on the Mets every single night?
Well, I won't take all of it from you. So I'll go one, then
Okay,
you can go. Because
fair
if I
enough.
take two, I'll just take your two probably.
I don't
It
think you will,
obviously
but I like this. I like you being a good co-host.
it obviously starts with Francisco Alvarez,
Of
right? Like
course.
this is the type of player that is a middle of the order franchise type of player. And while things are not going well, obviously in 2023, and based on their actions on the trade deadline, that's probably going to be how most of the rest of the year goes. But to see continued development from Alvarez over these next couple months and see how he reacts to being in a losing situation. This could kind of go across the board, but how does he react to playing at the big league level in New York on a team that's not expected to do anything? Because it's very easy to get up when things are going great and you're in a pennant race and you're trying to win a division or compete for a wild card spot. But when the team has basically told you 2023 ain't it, how do you get up for those games? So I'm very interested to see how Alvarez handles these next 2 months. And then does he pass Johnny Bench in the rookie 21-year-old catcher home run record thing? He's just a few behind. So Francisco Alvarez, I think, obviously tops the list.
I mean, no disagreement there. Alvarez is must watch every single night, sitting at 21 home runs as we sit and record this right now. So the chase for Johnny Bench's record is absolutely on. My starter here, Joe, is the man of the week already, and that's Kodai Senga. I look at Kodai Senga, his stat line for the year. If you told me nothing else in March besides Kodai Senga in about halfway through August will be 8-6 with a 3.24 ERA. He's already made 21 starts. He's pitched over 115 innings. He's striking out 11 batters over 9 innings. Oh yeah, and he was an all-star the first half of the season. I'd look and be like, "Wow, the Mets won 100 games again." I mean, it's crazy how Senga has nearly hit his ceiling for expectations this year. And obviously, many other things went wrong, which is unfortunate. But if this is the Senga the Mets get next year with some additions to the rotation in the offseason, I am not buying the whole 2024 is a retool, non competitive. The Mets aren't going to really be in it. The Mets aren't going to be making enough moves. Senga is not a mid level starter right now. He is proving to be a frontline guy. I don't need Senga to be the number one on this team, but if he's a formidable number two, the Mets have every chance to be competitive next year. And I will watch Senga for the rest of the year to see if that ERA can continue to go down. And honestly, it's just fun watching him pitch. It's different. His stuff's different. I like his energy. I like his compete level. And a little honorable mention here to Quintana, who very much is his compete level has not gone down at all, despite the team being out of it. Senga, though, might go down as, I know Billy Epler gets a lot of criticism. This is looking like a great move for $15 million a year over 5 years.
I think we need to realize that I think a lot of people are just looking back to the projections we had for Kodai Senga when he was coming over for Japan. And I think everyone is, and I'm guilty of it myself, saying mid-rotation starter. And I was going to say exactly what you said, Connor. Maybe it's time that we reevaluate how we think Kodai Senga translates. Because, I guess in theory, he could take a step back next year, but you would think after an off season and a full season of learning the game, learning the ball, learning the slope of the mound, like Kodai Senga could definitely be a number 2 type starter that you can rely on in 2024. And one other that I'll shout out, it's not here yet, but I think Ronnie Mauricio is going to be here soon enough. I can't imagine the Mets' plan is to have Brandon Nimmo be flanked by Rafael Ortega and DJ Stewart for the remainder of the year. So I think as part of the 2024 evaluation, we had talked about this last week, and I'm sure many other weeks before, that it's important that Ronnie Mauricio gets up here and gets some level of regular bats. Because if I'm Billy Epler, if I'm Steve Cohen, if I'm the Mets organization, I need to know before October, November, do I need to go spend real money, even if it's not $25 million a year in a long-term deal. Like, do I need to go spend $15 million a year on a starting left fielder, or can Ronnie Mauricio be my left fielder? So I think his time's coming. We may have speculated a little bit on a potential date sometime after August 19th for maybe some reasons that impact next year and in the future. But I think Ryan Mauricio's time is coming, and he may have gotten a little stagnant in AAA, and maybe he'll be re-energized with that call-up. And I did like seeing the other day against a rehabbing Chris Sale, obviously frontline pitcher for the Red Sox. Kind of almost took his head off with a 109-mile-an-hour line drive right back up the middle. So Mauricio is someone that I'm really looking forward to seeing, and hopefully that's coming here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, Joe, there is no doubt everybody is anticipating the arrival of Ronnie Mauricio. We have our eyes on that date. It'll be pretty funny when we're assuming it's going to be right around there for very specific reasons. And I think with Mauricio, you want to see if he can carry some momentum into spring, right? You love if a guy can come up the last 6 weeks, 5 weeks of the season, maybe have a hot stretch, and then you don't bet the house on him going into spring training to be your everyday, we'll assume, left fielder. We don't know where Mauricio is going to play, but man, it would only help him going into a competition next spring. I think the last thing for me is, and there have been much tougher Mets seasons in my lifetime than this, especially the faith that we have that ownership is going to commit to spending. And that doesn't mean spending like they have, but a commit to spending to making the team better, more competitive, and most importantly, the commitment to develop talent. But the Mets broadcast, right? I mean, I think you and I, as lifelong fans and many people watching this, it is very easy, even when the team is out of the running, to sit and watch the Mets broadcast. Not only the great directing that is done, that makes it a unique baseball watching experience, but the booth. It's like listening to a podcast every single night, whether it is the, obviously very advanced analysis that Ronnie brings to the pitching aspect of the game, Keith brings to the hitting aspect and the fielding aspect, and of course, Gary always bouncing different ideas off of them. So I will always watch the Mets with that booth because I just think it's always entertaining, especially when they give perspectives on teams that, quite frankly, as a baseball fan, we don't get to see often. Yes, the Mets got swept by the Orioles. The bottom line is the Orioles are one of the best stories on the field right now with their young talent of this baseball season, what they've been able to do with guys like Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson. They've brought up guys like Jordan Westberg and Colton Cowser this year as well. When you get to see young rosters like that, we got to see the Diamondbacks a couple months ago as well, even though things have kind of turned for them. I always like hearing the perspective of the booth on those young talents that we haven't gotten to hear yet. So obviously, we're watching the Mets. We're looking forward to watching the young talent on the Mets and the broadcast of the Mets. Of course, before we get to the mailbag, let's do our scoreboard predictions for the week. We're still in a pennant race here, Joe. The Mets might not be, but our scoreboard looks like it's going to come down literally until the end of this year. We are locked in a tie at 14 points each. There will be 7 Mets games before our next episode. As always, Joe, I will give you the floor for the first one. The over-under push is set at 2 for Francisco Alvarez home runs in the next 7 games.
I'm gonna push. I think Alvarez is gonna make up some ground on that Johnny Bench record, get a little closer. I'll say 2 exactly. I don't have many rhyme or reason other than Francisco Alvarez. And we said this the other week too. Francisco Alvarez could hit 5 home runs, no home runs, 2 home runs. You don't know, but I will go try to be safer and say push.
I'm with you as well. I'll go with the push here because, like you said, he hits them in bunches, but we've also seen some stretches with Alvarez where, he just isn't that force. It's a young player. This is the roller coaster of a very talented young player. I like the push number here as well. The next one, though, over-under push is set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs in the next 7 games. I will go over here. We just see Pete get locked into these stretches where the ball is just sailing out of the park consistently. Pete's a guy that probably wants to make up a lot of ground across the home run leaders across the league. It's also been very interesting, the conversation around Pete Alonso's long-term extension, no extension. While us as fans might look at this and go, man, the Mets don't have a ton to play for right now. The guys on the field don't feel that way. They are playing for their livelihood, their future income. Pete Alonso's stakes are as big as they might ever be right now. I think he's going to hit a lot of home runs to close out this season. I will go with the over here.
I will also go with the over. I think what's really important for the rest of the year, it's on the coaching staff, it's on the players. I mentioned it briefly before about how you react to being in a losing scenario. I don't think they're going to win a ton of games the rest of the way, and that's okay. The win-loss record isn't as important to me as I want to see the effort. I want it to feel like they have a pulse when they're out there every day. And Pete Alonso is a guy that I know Steve Cohen sent out some letter to season ticket holders, and Pete Alonso's name was mentioned like amongst the core. So I think it's important for Alonso to step up in this time specifically. It's important for Francisco Lindor to step up in this time because I think that sends a message to the rest of the clubhouse and the young players that are coming up that it's not always going to be pretty, but you have to show up every day and do your job. And I think Pete Alonso, like you said, Connor, it feels like he's definitely a guy that also hits them in bunches. And now I think some time is separated from that wrist injury that he was supposed to miss like a long time for, and he missed like a week. So maybe he's finally finding health, and you'll see Pete Alonso mash some dingers over the next week.
All right, plot twist here, Joe. There will be 6 Brooklyn Cyclone games before our next show. Over under push is set at 7 for Jett Williams walks in these next 6 games. Little background note here. As of this taping on Tuesday, before any games are played tonight, Williams is tied for 5th in minor league baseball in walks with 77 between St. Lucie and Brooklyn. And he has 8 walks in his first 6 games with Brooklyn so far. Oh, man, that is just absolutely insane. Joe, what are you taking here for Jett? That is a high number, but this man has gone over it before.
He's gone over it before. He's gone over it probably all year, which is why I'm going to go under.
Right.
I'm just going to say maybe he won't walk on average more than once a game over the next week. But, you know, I talked obviously a lot about where Jett Williams is at and how impressed I've been. But I'll say under, but it might be like 5 or 6 instead of 7, 8, 9.
I am too, just because it's 6 games right here. That number is really high. It's hard to sustain. Maybe Jett will prove us wrong. Who knows? I mean, honestly, it wouldn't shock either of us. It's just that's a very, very high number. And at some point, even at high A ball, these guys got to adjust. All right, there will be 6 Syracuse games before our next show. Over under push for 2 Brett Baty home runs in these next 6 games. I will go under. I don't think Baty's going to go to Syracuse and just try to put the ball over the fences. I think he needs to kind of maybe dial back the approach, getting back to that opposite field gaps hitter. I think Baty is smart enough to understand I don't need to come down here and hit 10 home runs in 20 games and send a message that I need to be back with the big league club. I just don't see that kind of approach from him right out of the gate, Joe. What do you like here?
I got to say, I mean, we have to separate from each other at some point, but
We do.
unfortunately, we just agree on everything this week, which makes for a less exciting scorecard, which maybe we should plan this out or something, but we don't plan things out. We just do them on the fly. So I'm also going to go under, and I was going to say a lot of what you just said, that I think the goals when he goes down to AAA Syracuse is going to be approach-based. It's going to be getting back to hitting the ball to all fields, make sure he's elevating the ball, because when he gets into trouble, it's when he's hitting the ball on the ground. So I think it's going to be a lot of approach based. And you know what? Maybe he does hit into those home runs. I mean, we saw it when he was back in AAA before he got called up. I felt like I was tweeting a Brett Baty home run almost every day. So it wouldn't stun me if he pushed or even went over. But I think the organizational goal for him will not be just go down and try to hit the ball as far as you can. It's going to be, let's take a step back. Let's reset mentally and physically, and let's get you back to the player that you are. Because Brett Baty has power, but he's not a power hitter. He's a pure hitter that has power. So he has to find his way back to that. So I guess I'll go under, and I guess the score's not going to change next week other than we're going to get some of them right, and our number is going to be higher.
Little fun fact with the scoreboard. This is the only part of the rundown that I never read before the show, almost ever, because I like the element of surprise in the answers. I don't want to think too much and think, what would Joe think here, or how would he break this down? I don't even want to have the power to look up numbers. We had the Jett Williams numbers prepared, thanks to Jeff, of course, producing. So yeah, this is one that we do on the fly, and it's one of those random weeks that we ended up agreeing. Let's close out with a couple mailbag questions here, Joe. Just a few to close out this show. This one from John Hidalgo. Which of the pitchers in the minors prospects projects the best, ace or number 2? And which one is a dark horse to be the best of the group?
Blade Tidwell's the number 1 pitching prospect in the system. I think I had him at number 9. I guess I should know my prospect list off the top of my head, but he was the top pitcher, and I think he's number 9. He is the one that has that upper rotation stuff. I mean, he sits 95 to 96. You'll see some 97s and 98s sprinkled in there. He has a wipeout slider. It's a true plus pitch. The changeup needs some work, but what I've seen from him this year, and especially over the last, let's call it 6-7 weeks, I've seen him purposely throw the changeup more, which is important for development. And we talked about really at the top of the show, like process over just pure results. He's had the pure results, which are great, but he's throwing changeups in non-changeup counts just to get more comfortable with the pitch. His control and command has improved. He's only made one start in Double-A, and it was just okay. He walked more guys than he had in a while in Brooklyn. So I'll certainly continue to monitor where he's at. But from a pure stuff standpoint, from a competitive standpoint, Blade Tidwell is the one that projects the best, I think, to be a front line type of starter if there is one in the system. And it's pretty cool to see him back with his former Tennessee teammate Drew Gilbert now with the Rumble Ponies. So go from a first and a second round pick, collegiate Team USA together, Tennessee together, and now in the Mets organization. And as far as an under the radar pitcher, I think we should not sleep on Christian Scott. We talked about him a bit, I believe, on last week's show or 2 weeks ago, whatever. He just keeps mowing them down in Double-A. 11 strikeouts in 4 innings in his last start. So he's obviously getting that swing and miss stuff. He's showing the ability to elevate the four-seam fastball. The slider's an above-average pitch. Again, another guy. He has a 4-pitch arsenal where it's a curve and a changeup that lag behind. He needs to work on those. He's throwing strikes. He's the kind of guy that right now I think has a very high floor of a high leverage reliever that relies on 2 above average to plus pitches. But if he can continue to harness that curveball and changeup, maybe Christian Scott does have that number 3, number 4 starter potential that would be a little unexpected. But obviously, check out the rest of my list. I don't know if there's more prospect questions, but check out the rest of my list because there are quite a few pitchers on there that I feel pretty good about. And now the Mets pitching is all making its way to the upper minors.
Yeah, Scott just keeps getting better. Since the move up to Binghamton, 9 starts, a 3 ERA, striking out over 11 batters per 9. The former 5th-round pick. The Mets love drafting pitchers from Florida here, Joe, and it might pay off with Christian Scott. Our last question for today's episode is from Castel Ortiz. The Mets are again leading MLB in hit by pitch. Some is their batting style, but a lot are message hit by pitches. We don't retaliate. Combined with last year's collapse and this year's performance, it seems this team lacks grit. Is that a fair take? I can't imagine this happening to the 86 team. Joe, before I toss this to you, very interesting take from Ronnie on the broadcast from this a little while ago, where he doesn't believe these are intentional, but he still believes that, I'm trying to be careful with this, in a sense, he believes that that doesn't mean you don't get thrown at when you're hitting teams this much, essentially. He's saying that things can be unintentional and there's still consequences, I think, which was a very fair take, the way Ronnie broke it down. It was much longer than that. What is your take on the Mets not only being hit by so many pitches, but the fact that they really have never responded?
Well, first off, I think asking to compare to the 1986 team as far as grit and willingness to fight. One, a different era, and 2, a largely different group of individuals. I am certainly, I guess maybe a little passive by nature. Like, I don't think it's intentional. I think Ronnie makes a great point that at some point you have to not even necessarily hit people, but send the message back. Like, brush them, stop doing that. But to me, I think the best comeback is to get them out instead and shut them down rather than putting guys on base and things like that. So I've kind of always had that mindset. I don't think the fact that they're not throwing back at teams means they don't have grit. I think it's definitely a weird scenario that has 2 completely differing mindsets on it. Like, there's the quote unquote old school where it's like, if you pimp a home run, you're getting thrown at. If you throw at me, I'm throwing it at you, and things like that. So there's certainly a lot of people that believe that, and I understand. But I also, as much as it would be maybe good for content, I don't want to see the Mets getting into brawls. I don't want to see the Mets getting into fights because you threw at whatever. So I understand the question. My philosophy generally is you don't need to throw back. Get them out. That's the best revenge, in my opinion.
There's both sides to it for me. I agree
sure.
that often throwing back is a bit archaic at times, and it often just ends up hurting yourself. Look at the Jose Ramirez situation. He's going to appeal it, but he's suspended 3 games. Can the Mets afford to lose one of their star players for 3 games? So that's one side of it. But I will say sometimes the team needs to be woken up, and the Mets, in my opinion, have slept walk through this entire season. I think back to 2 years ago when they had a little run in with the Yankees, and it seemed to bring out the best in Lindor. He hit 3 home runs. It was a very intense game when the Mets didn't have a ton to play for at the time. So I do see the good in it sometimes, but you have to be a little careful, and it's a very fine line and a tough balance. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And a reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.